I was sent away with good news. I had pneumonia. It eased my soul and helped me navigate the red waters I walked. But the treatments didn't stop the blood from pouring from my lips. Each day seemed worse than the last, but like any other hardship, we become accustomed to it. Over and over, the doctor did the same treatment. He heard hoofbeats and thought it was a horse, but he never thought to look to see if it were a zebra. 5 months passed. My crimson cough became my life. It was a strangely lonely time of confusion and pain. No one likes to be around a person coughing up blood. I can't blame them. I wouldn't either. It's scary. Witnessing someone spit up blood is horrific. It's a clear indication of disease and death, and people like to avoid those kinds of things. Eventually, a fearful friend had the vision to force me to get a second opinion. This is what started my journey and saved my life. It was this road that led me to a path to see a pulmonologist. Her focus and persistence ordered an assortment of scans and tests revealing a tumor in my lung. She wanted a closer look, so she arranged a bronchoscopy party, and I was the guest of honor. It was a party like no other. The walls were a sterile white and fluorescent lights set the stage for the festivities. I was nervous, anxious, cautious perhaps, as I sat in an uncomfortable hospital chair. My stomach ached, filled with uncertainty and fear as I waited for them to unromantically jam something deep into my throat. It was a party, and like all good parties, we must indulge the pleasure of imbibing some liquid courage. The liquid they gave me wasn't poured down my throat, it was sprayed down my gullet. As it began, the nurse gave me a half smile, the kind opposite to comforting, and said, "This is going to taste really bad." I opened my mouth and she sprayed. Oh my God, she was right. To give you an idea of its flavor, imagine chewing a mouthful of aspirin mixed with blood and embalming fluid. This wasn't moments of discomfort. It was 20 minutes of pure agony. 20 minutes, and the flavor never subsided. When my gag reflex eased away, they continued their romance. I crawled onto the medical table, and then they started to stick me with things and injecting me with stuff. A few moments later, I found myself falling into a deep twilight sleep. I remember waking in a fit of tears, not sure what I was or where things were. Later, I returned to discover the results of the bronchoscopy, and I learned I had an almond sized tumor in my lung. My doctor said it was benign and all of this could be solved with an easy, non invasive surgery. They poked some holes in me, used some fancy robots, and cut out a small portion of my lung. Worst case scenario, I'd be tip top shape in 2 or 3 days. It wasn't that easy. The journey never is. Nothing is easy. To have these robots poked into my side, I needed to see a fancy surgeon, one specialized in friendly thoracic cuts. So she sent me to a thoracic surgeon. I called the doctor's office, got an appointment, and went in to hear what he had to say. I waited in an old, worn, aesthetically out of date office. It was a long wait, so I spent a lot of time looking around at things. There was a lot of archaic equipment in the room. It was really creepy place to say the least. Once I entered the room, my heart raced. The reality of what was about to be began to become real. The surgery was going to happen. I swallowed and listened as he began to speak. What I thought was going to be a conversation about a sleeve resection became something worse. My tumor went from benign to malignant. It went from no cancer to stage 1 cancer, from a few days of recovery to several months. It went from the removal of a small piece to the loss of my entire lung. He said the C word, cancer. When that happened, my world twisted, turned, and wrapped in on itself. I was flooded with feels, and it was terrifying, mind-numbing, and overwhelming. The world ceased to be as time seemed to stop. I remember driving home angry and afraid. My world turned upside down and my pieces were falling out. I was so angry I wanted to shout. Slowly, I eased into what had to be done. I was in a lot of pain and could barely breathe. So I succumbed to my destiny because I wanted to be cancer free. When I went in to have my surgery, I was accompanied by my friend Jamie, and she sat beside me. I laid on a thin hospital mattress in my flimsy gown under a roughly textured sheet. "Would you like a hot blanket?" the nurse inquired. I knew the cover was meant to mute my anxiety. I nodded, and she placed 2 warm blankets on me. It felt good, and it reminded me of a welcoming massage. Off and on, people would come and go, entering the room to ask this or stick me with that. After some time, a man walked in and asked me if I wanted an epidural. I was hesitant at first, but I acquiesced. They injected me with something into my IV, easing me into euphoria and releasing my anxiety. This isn't so bad, I thought, until people began to move fast and stand all about. They leaned me forward and I became frightened. They spoke with urgency, telling me everything was going to be all right. I felt a terrible pain, followed by a wet warmth across my back. Then nothing. I didn't even notice laying back down as I felt a sterile steel fog cover everything. The bed vibrated like it was being wheeled somewhere, and then I was lifted into the air and set on top of a cold table. People were talking, but I couldn't see them. "Mr. White?" I heard a woman's voice. "Yes," I groggily replied. "Mr. White, what are we doing today?" she asked. You're here to cut a tumor out of my lung." "Which lung, Mr. White?" My right lung." I could hear movement and the clatter of metal things. "All right, Mr. White, I want you to start counting backwards from 10. This time a man spoke. 10, 9, 8. My world disappeared. I found myself in a deep sleep. I was falling, yet no wind washed over me. A soft, rhythmic pulse echoed through a liquid-like something around me. The surface of my flesh felt frigid and slimy with sweat. My eyes were swollen and heavy. At first, all I could see was an eerie gray light slide into my eyes. My weight shifted as I fell. I watched a sterile steel fog disappear against an endless sea beneath me. It was darker and deeper than any ocean, and it radiated a nothingness that chewed away the chill. It moved in unnatural ways, crawling like tenuous waves of wax. Occasionally I would hear a pop or a click behind me, but it was not enough to draw me away from the terror below. My face neared the leaching void. The closer I came, the less cold I became. My deep, dark parts told me this darkness was the end, and to taste it would mean oblivion. A ribbon of silvery light laced around my sight. It was a shivering cold, and my teeth chattered against something put in my mouth while I was asleep. There was a thickness in my throat, but I could breathe. The air was salty but smooth. Oh my God, I can breathe. I started to hear voices. "Mr. White, Mr. White." They were saying so much it felt busy and confusing. The light increased in intensity, and so did my disorientation. "I can breathe," I remember saying to the doctor as they wheeled me somewhere, and I fell asleep. I woke from the twilight of my medicine-induced sleep. My shoulders shook and my body quaked under the pressure of so much pain. With each breath, I sipped the sterile, stale air of my hospital lair. I was caked in scary sorrow and weary wonder as my loved ones feared I would take my final number. It was dark, shadowy. Strangely still, my insides felt oddly ill. Though afraid, there was a soft, soothing voice warning me of what was to come. It said, "Feel the pain, but not if it drives you insane. With too much medicine, your healing will never begin. She tried to tie my mind to a silvery string, able to set me free. Ultimately, the pain would kick, and I would scream so intensely it deafened my ears to all the lessons I learned from my nurse that day. She disappeared into the darkness as my mind sunk away into a soft, empty sleep. Hours later, I awoke to the incessant beep and an angry nurse treating me like dirty feet. "What is that?" I asked. "Nothing, don't worry about it," the nurse replied. It was a different nurse. She did not possess the soft, soothing voice. Instead, it was sharp, strong, and furiously inflamed. She walked with force, jutting this way then that, like bolts of lighting in a trap. She lacked the gentle glide of my first nurse guide, and spoke like she was looking for a fight. The beeps continued till there was a change in my soft NTC. The tide turned as I began to feel a throb burn. It was hot and glowed with bright light. It started on the point of a speck, then sliced through my insides. I clenched and gasped for air as my insides screamed. It was already too much, and I begged to be set free. My world became dark and grim like inside the Reaper's grin. I felt my body dissolve into a pool of milky meat, leaving only my squirming nerves. The throbbing burn in my chest spread into my brachial plexus, becoming a nexus of searing flame. The pain became a light. It was the only luminescence I could see. It moved through me like tentacles of molten stone, melting and burning me away. Slowly, my mind began to fray as I knew there was no way I could escape. I wanted to die as I realized my crying and pleading fell on deaf ears. I feared it would never end. Seconds felt like minutes in this horror that lasted a half hour. Someone came and saved the day, bringing the gift of the painkiller I desperately needed. I learned to fear that beep. It was a warning my epidural was about to empty completely. With a nice numbness in my nerves, I floated back into the soft, empty sea of peace. Hours passed as I slept, and slowly my ears opened, my eyes to the sound of a distant beep. My body felt like gooey glue starting to slowly harden. Waking from my dreamscape, the beeps and bleeps grew louder, and my heart began to hurry with worry. I felt a thundering boom in my blood, and the air began to shake. My eyes stared with fear as I neared the whirlpool of tremendous torture. "No, no, no," I muttered to plead, beginning a reprieve from the complete, coming insanity. Oh, my fingers twisted the sheets. "It's running out. Please help me." I begged the nurse to refill the medicine, making the pain go away. At first, it felt like a warm blot of water sitting on the inside of my chest. Then I could feel it boil and spread as the pain began to swell. In anticipation, I stiffened and clenched my teeth. Darkness crawled in, and my lung emptied with a scream. My legs kicked and arms thrashed, assaulting the invisible enemy within me. There was a monster inside my chest, and it was eating me alive. It was more than a nagging nibble. Its maw was chomping hard, and the pain was making me insane. My existence became a thick, raw stroke of horror. My epidural had emptied twice within the first 10 hours after surgery, but the madness wasn't over. Once again, it would empty, leaving me to indulge the insanity of this never-ending agony.